What if spending millions of dollars was harder than earning them? The 1985 comedy Brewster's Millions, starring Richard Pryor and John Candy, brought this absurd premise to life. But behind the laughs lies a treasure trove of bizarre production secrets. From royal visitors on set to impromptu rewrites that confuse the star, a baseball field built on top of a power plant, and a sequel starring the original star's real-life children, this movie has more strange stories than most people realize. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Brewster's Millions. Fact 1. Royal interruption on set. When you're filming a big Hollywood comedy in 1985, the last thing you'd expect is a visit from British royalty, but that's exactly what happened on the set of Brewster's Millions. Princess Anne, the only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, and Prince Philip stopped by the production during her official tour of the United States, and the whole thing turned into a surprisingly awkward situation for the cast and crew. The Princess Royal arrived on set and was greeted by John Candy and producer Joel Silver, who gave her a tour of the filming location. According to reports from the day, Candy and the princess had a pleasant conversation about a recent fire that had broken out at Pinewood Studios in England, showing that even royalty keeps up with entertainment industry news. The production team had clearly put together a proper welcome for their distinguished visitor, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, there was one major problem with the timing of Princess Anne's visit. The filmmakers had originally scheduled her to meet Richard Pryor and watch him film a scene, but director Walter Hill had been running ahead of schedule and had already shot Pryor's scenes for that day. This meant that the star of the movie was completely absent when royalty came calling, turning what should have been a marquee moment into a missed opportunity. An observer on set was quoted as saying, "I don't think she even knows Richard Pryor. I'm sure she was more excited at meeting John Candy, who's a Canadian citizen." While this comment might have been a bit presumptuous about the princess's knowledge of American comedians, it does highlight how the whole situation played out. Instead of meeting the film's lead actor, Princess Anne ended up spending her time with the supporting cast and production team, making this royal visit one of the stranger behind-the-scenes moments in the movie's production history. The incident shows how even the most carefully planned celebrity appearances can go sideways when film schedules don't cooperate. Fact 2. Director made it just for money. Walter Hill is a name that usually brings to mind intense action films filled with violence, grit, and tough guys facing impossible odds. He directed classics like The Warriors in 1979, which became a cult favorite for its dark portrayal of New York City gang warfare, and then followed it up with 48 Hours in 1982, the film that launched Eddie Murphy into superstardom and practically invented the buddy cop genre. Hill's filmography reads like a masterclass in hard-edged filmmaking, with movies featuring shootouts, car chases, and minimal dialogue punctuated by explosive action sequences. So when Universal Pictures announced that Walter Hill would be directing Brewster's Millions, a light-hearted comedy about a baseball player trying to waste $30 million, people in Hollywood were understandably confused. It seemed like the strangest possible choice for a director whose previous work couldn't have been further from family-friendly comedy. Years later, Hill cleared up the mystery in the most brutally honest way possible. In a 1988 interview with the Chicago Tribune, he admitted without hesitation that he took the job solely to improve his bank account and success quotient. There was no artistic vision driving his decision, no burning desire to prove he could master comedy, and no personal connection to the material. It was purely a financial transaction. Hill was refreshingly blunt about treating Brewster's Millions as a paycheck gig, something Hollywood directors rarely admit publicly, even when everyone knows it's true. What makes this story even more interesting is that Richard Pryor, one of the greatest comedians of all time and the film's star, reportedly signed on for exactly the same reason. According to Hill, Pryor needed the money and took the role despite it being a significant departure from his usual edgy, provocative comedy style. Both men approached Brewster's Millions as a professional obligation rather than a passion project, which explains why the film feels somewhat restrained compared to what either of them was capable of producing. The movie made over $40 million at the box office against a $15 million budget, so at least their mercenary approach paid off financially, even if critics weren't particularly impressed with the final product. Fact 3. The Iceberg Man Prank. One of the most genuinely spontaneous moments in Brewster's Millions happened entirely by accident, and it involved a scene with comedian Archie Hahn playing a character known as the Iceberg Man. Hahn was a member of the legendary improvisational comedy troupe The Groundlings, and he'd been cast in a small but memorable role as a businessman pitching an absolutely ridiculous investment scheme to Montgomery Brewster. The character's proposal was simple but absurd. He wanted Brewster to fund a project where massive icebergs would be fitted with giant engines, then sailed all the way to the Middle East to provide fresh water to farmers in desert regions. It was exactly the kind of wasteful, over-the-top spending opportunity that Brewster needed to burn through his $30 million. What made this scene particularly special was that the filmmakers decided to rewrite Archie Hahn's dialogue at the last minute, completely changing what the Iceberg Man would say during his pitch to Brewster. However, nobody bothered to tell Richard Pryor about these script changes before they started filming. When the cameras rolled and Hahn delivered his newly rewritten lines, Pryor had no idea what was coming. The confusion on Brewster's face during that scene wasn't acting at all. It was Richard Pryor genuinely trying to figure out what this character was talking about and where the scene was going. The directors loved how authentic and natural Pryor's bewildered reaction looked, so they kept it in the final cut of the movie. This kind of spontaneous filmmaking was relatively rare on a major studio production, but it created one of the film's most memorable moments. Archie Hahn's background in improvisation meant he was perfectly comfortable delivering the new dialogue on the fly, while Pryor's natural comedic instincts allowed him to roll with the unexpected changes and still make the scene work. The result was a perfect blend of planned comedy and genuine surprise that audiences never knew was completely unscripted. Fact 4. John Candy was jealous of Murphy. Behind the scenes of Brewster's Millions, an unexpected moment of celebrity tension unfolded that had nothing to do with the cameras rolling. According to comedian Paul Mooney's memoir, Black is the New White, John Candy experienced an uncomfortable pang of jealousy when he brought Eddie Murphy to visit the set as his guest, only to watch Murphy and Richard Pryor instantly hit it off like old friends reuniting after years apart. The chemistry between Pryor and Murphy was immediate and electric, which shouldn't have been too surprising considering Murphy had already worked with director Walter Hill on the massively successful film 48 Hours, just 3 years earlier in 1982. Murphy was also riding high on the success of Trading Places, which had been written by the same screenwriting team behind Brewster's Millions. The two comedy legends found common ground effortlessly, sharing stories and laughing together while Candy watched from the sidelines. What made this situation particularly uncomfortable for Candy was that he had invited Murphy to the set himself, likely hoping to strengthen his own connection with both comedy icons. Instead, he found himself feeling like the odd man out in a trio where he should have been the connector. The sting of this social dynamic weighed heavily enough on Candy that he eventually sought out Paul Mooney, who was a close friend and frequent collaborator of Richard Pryor's, to confide his worries. In a vulnerable moment, Candy admitted to Mooney that he believed Pryor genuinely disliked him. This confession reveals just how much the situation had gotten under Candy's skin, especially considering that Candy and Pryor were supposed to be building on-screen chemistry as best friends in the movie. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. Here were two of the biggest comedy stars of the 1980s playing inseparable buddies on film, while one of them privately worried that his co-star couldn't stand him. Despite these behind-the-scenes tensions, both actors remained professional throughout filming, and their friendship on screen never betrayed the awkwardness that Candy felt off-camera. Fact 5. Baseball field on a power plant. When you watch Brewster's Millions and see the Hackensack Bulls playing baseball in their rundown home stadium, you might notice something unusual in the background. A train occasionally rumbles through the outfield during games. But the real story behind that stadium is even stranger than the train gag. The entire baseball field wasn't actually in Hackensack, New Jersey at all, but was instead built on top of a massive 153-acre power generating station owned by the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power in Sun Valley, California. The LADWP Valley Generating Station provided an unlikely home for this fictional minor league ballpark, and the production team didn't build the set from scratch either. Instead, they recycled and repurposed the baseball stadium set that had been constructed just 1 year earlier for a short-lived television series called Bay City Blues, which aired on NBC for only 13 episodes before getting canceled in 1984. The producers of Brewster's Millions saw an opportunity to save money by reusing this existing set, which fit perfectly with their story about a struggling minor league team playing in a less than glamorous facility. The location gave the filmmakers plenty of space to work with, and the industrial surroundings of the power plant actually added to the authentic feel of a low-budget baseball operation where trains could realistically cut through the outfield. The set served its purpose well during filming, but it didn't last long after the movie wrapped. In 1989, just 4 years after Brewster's Millions was released, the LADWP demolished the entire baseball stadium set when they redeveloped the generating station site. So this quirky piece of movie history, which started as a TV show set and became the home of the Hackensack Bulls, ended up being completely erased, leaving behind only the footage captured in Richard Pryor's comedy about the impossibility of spending $30 million in 30 days. Fact 6. Statue of Liberty under construction. If you watch closely during the scene where Montgomery Brewster flies his minor league baseball team to New York City, you'll notice something unusual in the background. The Statue of Liberty is completely covered in scaffolding. At first glance, you might think this was a deliberate choice by the filmmakers, or maybe even a continuity error, but the truth is much more interesting. The scaffolding wasn't added by the production team at all. It was actually there in real life during the filming of Brewster's Millions in 1984. The iconic statue was undergoing a massive conservation and restoration project that lasted from 1984 to 1986, timed perfectly to be completed before the statue's 100th anniversary celebration in 1986. This was one of the most extensive renovations in the monument's history, designed to preserve it for future generations and repair decades of wear and damage from weather and pollution. The entire structure was essentially wrapped in metal scaffolding while workers replaced corroded iron armature bars, cleaned the copper exterior, and made crucial structural repairs to ensure the statue would last well into the next century. Rather than trying to digitally remove the scaffolding or avoid showing the statue entirely, director Walter Hill and his crew simply filmed what was there. The result is an unintentional time capsule moment that places Brewster's Millions firmly in the mid-1980s. For viewers who remember this period, seeing the scaffolded statue brings back memories of a specific moment in New York City history. For younger audiences watching the film today, it serves as a fascinating historical detail that most people have completely forgotten about. The restoration project was a major undertaking that cost over $87 million and involved craftsmen from multiple countries, making it one of the largest preservation efforts ever attempted on a monument of this scale. Fact 7. It's the 7th film version. When Richard Pryor and John Candy starred in Brewster's Millions in 1985, they were actually part of a long Hollywood tradition that stretched back more than 7 decades. The movie was the 7th film adaptation of George Barr McCutcheon's novel, which was originally published way back in 1902, making it one of the most frequently remade stories in cinema history. The premise about someone needing to spend a fortune to inherit an even bigger fortune clearly struck a chord with audiences across multiple generations, and filmmakers kept coming back to it again and again. The first silent film version appeared in 1914, followed by another silent adaptation in 1921. Then came a 1935 version during the Great Depression, when the idea of having too much money must have seemed particularly fantastical to audiences struggling through economic hardship. The 1945 adaptation starred Dennis O'Keefe and had a more straightforward post-World War II tone that reflected the era's optimism. Interestingly, there was also a 1926 version called Miss Brewster's Millions that flipped the gender of the main character, putting a woman in the lead role decades before. That became more common in Hollywood. But the remakes didn't stop with English-language films. The story proved so universally appealing that it was adapted in other countries as well, including a 1961 British version titled Three on a Spree, plus multiple adaptations in India, including a 1954 Telugu film. By the time Walter Hill's 1985 version came around, audiences had seen this basic concept play out numerous times, but the combination of Richard Pryor's comedic talents and the updated 1980s setting with its $30 million challenge instead of the original $1 million amount gave the story fresh appeal for a new generation of moviegoers who had probably never seen any of the earlier versions. Fact 8. Rick Moranis' bizarre cameo. One of the strangest and most memorable moments in Brewster's Millions comes courtesy of Rick Moranis, who pops up in a brief but hilarious cameo as a character named Morty King, who introduces himself as the King of the Mimics. His entire gimmick is that he repeats absolutely everything that anyone around him says, word for word, which quickly becomes both funny and incredibly annoying. In the scene, Monty Brewster is meeting with an interior designer to discuss renovating an apartment he's renting, and she keeps suggesting increasingly outrageous design concepts with names like Mesopotamia and Busby Berkeley. Every single time Brewster or the designer says something, Morty King immediately echoes it back to them in perfect imitation, creating a chaotic loop of repeated dialogue that drives everyone in the room crazy. The character serves no real purpose to the plot other than to be one more expensive and absurd person that Brewster hires to help him burn through his $30 million. But Moranis makes the most of his screen time with his trademark comedic timing and deadpan delivery. What makes this cameo even more interesting is that Moranis had worked with director Walter Hill just 1 year earlier on the 1984 film Streets of Fire, so the two already had an established working relationship. Hill was primarily known for directing hardcore action movies like The Warriors and 48 Hours, not comedies, so Brewster's Millions represented a major departure for him. Having familiar faces like Moranis around probably helped make the experience a bit more comfortable. The cameo also reunited Moranis with his former SCTV comedy partner, John Candy, who plays Brewster's best friend Spike Nolan throughout the entire film. Even though their scenes together are limited, it's a treat for fans of both comedians to see them share the screen, even if Moranis is only there for a couple of minutes. The King of the Mimics bit remains one of those oddball comedy moments that people remember long after watching the movie. Fact 9. Pryor and Hill clashed frequently. Behind the scenes of Brewster's Millions in 1985, the relationship between director Walter Hill and star Richard Pryor was anything but smooth. Hill, who had just come off the massive success of 48 Hours with Eddie Murphy, found himself dealing with a very different kind of production challenge when working with Pryor. The two men clashed frequently during filming, and according to Hill himself, the root of many problems was Pryor's ongoing struggle with substance abuse at the time. Hill later opened up about the difficulties in interviews, explaining that Pryor was caught in a painful contradiction during this period of his career. As Hill recalled, Pryor didn't believe he could be funny unless he was using drugs, but at the same time, he was terrified that taking drugs would kill him. This created an impossible situation for the comedian, who was trying to perform at his best while battling his own demons. Hill also noted that Pryor was dealing with serious financial problems, which meant he had to keep working and accepting roles to make money, even when he wasn't in the best condition to do so. Some shooting days were particularly rough when Pryor showed up deep into his drug use, making it difficult for Hill to get the performances he needed. The tension between them was palpable on set, with creative disagreements often escalating into heated confrontations. Despite Hill's reputation as a tough, no-nonsense director who could handle difficult personalities, even he found the situation challenging to navigate. However, the story has a surprisingly positive ending. After production wrapped and the pressure of filming was behind them, Hill and Pryor were able to patch things up. The two men eventually developed a genuine friendship, with Hill later speaking about Pryor with obvious affection and respect. Hill made it clear that despite all the difficulties, he genuinely liked Richard and understood the immense pressure and personal struggles the comedian was facing during that time. Fact 10. Jennifer Beals. Almost starred. When casting began for Brewster's Millions in the early 1980s, the filmmakers had their eyes set on one of Hollywood's hottest rising stars for the female lead role of Angela Drake, the sharp accountant assigned to track Montgomery Brewster's spending. That star was Jennifer Beals, fresh off her breakout performance in the 1983 dance sensation Flashdance, where she captivated audiences as Alex Owens, the welder by day and dancer by night, who dreams of attending a prestigious ballet academy. Beals had become a cultural phenomenon almost overnight, and her star power would have brought significant marquee value to Brewster's Millions alongside Richard Pryor and John Candy. However, the role ultimately went to Lonette McKee, an accomplished actress and singer who brought her own impressive credentials to the project. McKee wasn't just a consolation prize or second choice based on talent alone. She actually had an established working relationship and on-screen chemistry with Richard Pryor, having co-starred with him in the 1977 comedy Which Way Is Up, where Pryor played 3 different roles and McKee played his wife in one of the storylines. This Pryor collaboration likely gave the producers and director Walter Hill confidence that McKee and Pryor could recreate that chemistry, which was crucial for the romantic subplot between Brewster and Angela that develops throughout the film. McKee brought a grounded, professional quality to Angela Drake that served the story well. Her character needed to be believable as a competent paralegal who could keep up with Brewster's increasingly wild spending schemes while remaining skeptical of his motives, and McKee delivered that balance between attraction and suspicion effectively. While we'll never know how Jennifer Beals might have interpreted the role differently, McKee's performance helped anchor the film's romantic elements amid all the comedic chaos of Brewster's money-spending adventures. And her previous experience working with Pryor certainly didn't hurt the overall dynamic between the two leads. Fact 11. Connections to 48 Hours. Everywhere. If you pay close attention during Brewster's Millions, you'll notice that director Walter Hill filled the movie with subtle callbacks to his earlier hit film, 48 Hours, which came out just 3 years earlier in 1982. The most obvious connection is the bar where Montgomery Brewster and Spike Nolan get into their infamous brawl at the beginning of the movie. That dive bar is called Torchy's, and it's the exact same bar name from 48 Hours, where Eddie Murphy's character Reggie Hammond shakes down the bartender for information. Hill didn't just reuse the name as a coincidence or Easter egg, he actually filmed scenes